Oh my god, my head is in my way. Okay, sorry, hold on. Presents. I don't want to do that either. Oh, I'm struggling with this. Okay, present. My screen. There we go. Share. I'm gonna go to my hover cam. And why is it not working? Hover cam. Okay. I'm having technology issues today. Hold on. Oh, it works first period, but it's not going to be my friend today. Hover cam. Oh, at least in my last period, they were just streaming the whole time. Oh, there we go, guys. Okay, we're finally working here. So, on a separate sheet of paper, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, and you don't even have to write down these first few. It was more just as a reminder. So you guys have seen slope before, like in your past math life at some point. Um, so it's just today's just a quick review. I'll do a few problems with you. I might have you try a few, but besides that, we just want to make sure we have these basics down because basically slope pops up in every section for this whole chapter. So the first thing we need to remember a few things about slope. And when we're talking about graphs, we would say that slope is rise over run. Hey guys, does anyone remember what letter do we use to represent slope? You can either write it in the chat or just say it. What letter do we use to represent slope? Oh, thank you. Daniel got me. It's M. I forget. I've looked it up a million times. It's from some French word. I don't know what it is, but M represents slope. When we think about slope in terms of a graph, we think about rise over run. So that probably sounds familiar to you. But just as once again, good reminders today. So rise over run. Okay, delightful. So once again, if you don't write these, that's okay. It's more just watching. So when we think about rise over run, rise is your vertical direction, run is your horizontal direction. So we want to make sure you always do the vertical first and then the horizontal. Some people like to go right or left first. Don't do that. And I feel like you do that with normal points, so you get into the habit of it. So for this, you read it like a book. You would read from left to right. When I'm going from this point to this point, once again, I move in the vertical direction. I would have to move down one, two, three, four, five, and then I would move to the right one, two, three. Just as a reminder, as you're counting, you do not count the original points. That's just your starting point. So from here, it's one, two, three, four, five down, and then one, two, three to the right. So five down, three to the right. Once again, you don't need to write this for now. You can write the next thing. This is more just watching. Um, just as a reminder, take into account your direction. So anytime we go down, where it's always going to be a negative, and anytime we move right, that's a positive direction. So the slope of this line would be negative 5/3. Okay, so that's just your answer. That's the slope. We found it. So the next one, when we count rise over run, just think about your 2 points. We're rising one, two, three, four, five. So we went up five. And we're not running. So when I think about saying rise over run, I would say the rise is five, but the run is zero. Does anyone know if I divide by zero or if I have zero in the denominator, what my answer would be? You can either say it or type it. If I have a zero in the denominator, what is my answer? Someone, you can type it. It's not zero. Good guess. Thank you for guessing. I always appreciate when someone. What? Nope, not five either. Nope, not negative five. Thanks. Nope, not one. No, you could have done that. No, you're just saying numbers now. Thank you for, but yes, thank you for participating. I'll take anything I can get. And it would be undefined. You cannot divide by zeros, you nutties, right? That's one of those like unwritten math. Well, it is. It's a written math rule. If you try to divide by zero in a calculator, it will tell you you can't do it. Um, and it's because when you divide, you make things into groups. So saying if you can't take five things and put it into zero groups, it doesn't make sense. So anytime you have a zero in the denominator only, it would be undefined. If you had a zero in the numerator, it would just be zero. So just as a heads up, so you know that. And we can see once again, we call this a vertical line. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But when we see vertical lines, the slope is undefined. Okay, and then this one, just once again counting. I'm just going to go off the 2 points that are kind of labeled there. So from here, I go up 1, 2, a 3, a 4, 5, 6. So up 6. And then I went to the right 1, 2, 3, 4. Right 4. I'm just writing myself the thing. So my slope, we would say rise is 6, run is 4. I can reduce that. So if you can reduce it, please do so. And then think about it. If I go up 1, 2, 3 over 1, 2, there was another point in there that I just kind of skipped over. So you can keep extending up and down, whatever you need. So if you didn't write those, that's fine, because I'm kind of doing a worksheet and that's annoying to do an entire graph. But we just want to start reminding our brains of some of this. Are there any questions with that first section? What's up? Mm-hmm. No, one would be negative because when you're looking at it, see how it's going. See when you look. So if you look at things from left to right, like we're reading a book, right? See how this like looks like it's going down. And when it looks like it's going down, it should have a negative. This looks like it's going up, so that's why it's positive. Okay, perfect. Thank you for asking questions. Any other questions? Oh, like a horizontal line? Vertical, okay, yep. It doesn't matter because you could say you went down and it was -5/0, but anytime you divide by zero, it's always going to be undefined. So it doesn't really matter in that case because once you see a vertical line, it's automatically undefined. It doesn't really matter which direction you go to do it. So we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. No, so it would only be zero over if it was a horizontal line, yeah. So if you had like 2 points here, because the rise is zero, and then the run, let's say, is 2. So that gives me 0. But anytime it's vertical, it's always undefined. We talk a lot about vertical and horizontal later, so we'll go into more detail on that in a few minutes. And in the next few sections. All right, so these next ones you should be writing down. So once again, if you didn't want to do the whole graph, that was okay with me. But these ones I do want you to write down because these are steps you are going to need to know. So we want to find the slope of a line passing through pairs of points. We don't want to graph them. So graphing is great to visualize, but it's kind of a pain a lot of the times, especially if you one, I don't even know how to graph number 7. There's just like random variables, like I don't know what's going on. And like graphing is just a pain. So we do want to have algebraic ways to solve for slope, and we do have a little formula. So please write this formula down somewhere. I'm just going to kind of write it off to the side for us. So our formula is the slope equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So that's my formula. Some people last year said they did y1 minus y2. That's fine. Just make sure on the bottom you do x1 minus x2. So you just have to kind of keep the order the same. Basically, you're just finding the difference in the 2 points and then dividing it, doing y over x. So for the first one, I'll kind of label everything, and then from there, we'll just start to plug in and making sure we understand what goes where. Pay attention to things like signs, like if you're subtracting a negative, that happens sometimes. And we even see one with variables as well. So let's look at number 4. So when I look at a point, that's an x and a y. So I'm going to label the first point x1 and y1. The second point is x2 and y2. So now I'm going to just plug into my formula. Okay, that's not bad. I'm finding the slope. So y2 minus y1, I just looked up the corresponding numbers, over x2 minus x1. And then I'm just going to do some simplifying. So it's kind of nice. This is quick. That would give me what, 5 over 3? I can't do anything to that. So leave it as an improper fraction. Do not give me a mixed number for slope. I always want improper. If you can reduce it, do so, but we can't. So that would be my slope. Okay, that wasn't bad. So we can kind of keep going here. Once again, you can keep labeling these with x1, y1, x2, y2. I'm just going to kind of go off what I have. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And then just do some simplifying. So that's what, 5 over 5? Okay, that was pretty easy. I can reduce that. My slope for that one would just be 1. Sorry, I'm just trying to give you a few seconds. I know some of you are probably in weird places trying to write notes. I really contemplated doing these notes from my bed, but I didn't think it was going to work today. I just wanted to like snuggle in. I'm at my dining room instead. Um, okay, so number 6, y2, this is where you need to be careful because it's minus and y1 is negative over x2 minus x1. Be careful, those double negatives, they do turn to positives, right? So some people say keep, change, or the opposite of a negative is a positive. So negative 12 plus 2, or minus negative 2, gives me negative 10. Negative 2 plus 2 gives me 0. Hey, that looks familiar. We just talked about dividing by 0. And when we look back up, when we divided by 0, technically that is a vertical line. Anytime you see that 0 in the denominator, your answer is going to be a slope of undefined. Just as a heads up, that 0 denominator is your hint at that. So just put that there. And then 7, you're like, what the heck am I going to do? You just plug it in like you would numbers. So variables are fine. We see them all the time. That's the whole basis of algebra here. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So once again, just be careful with the double negative. That does turn to a positive. And that's going to give me negative 2n. I'm just combining my terms over 4m. So you're probably thinking, oh, n and m, I can't do anything. But we can reduce that just fraction, negative 2 over 4, right? That would give me negative 1n over 2n. And that's how you would just write your answer. So you can't do anything else from there. So just know the slope formula as we're moving forward or have it written down. And we just want to make sure basically every section in chapter 5 has something to do with slope. We talk about slope intercept, point slope. We talk about slopes of verticals and horizontals. We talk about parallel and perpendicular slopes. So that's one of those things here. You do it first because you really are going to need it a lot. So just as a heads up there. Any questions on kind of that second part? Beautiful. And then just as a reminder, we just talked about a quick up there and as we kind of move forward. But if you have a horizontal line, so remember horizontals this way, I always think of the horizon. That's a slope of 0. And a vertical line, which is this, is always a slope of undefined. So I'll just give you a second if you're catching up with any notes. There's a few problems at the bottom we'll do, and then there's just a few graphs on the back we'll look at, and we can just do sketches in your notebook for those. Move my head over here. There we go. All right, so the next few problems, they kind of pop up a lot. It's one of those like, that's kind of a random problem, but we will see it. So it gives us a pair of points, but we notice in the points there's something missing. So whether there's an x missing or a y missing, it just depends on the problem. It also gives us the slope. So on all the other ones, we were finding the slope, and this one, it gives us a slope. And our main goal is to find the missing variable. So it's really just plugging into a formula. Plug in what you know, solve for what you don't know. So when I think about this, think about y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Right, and that's going to equal my slope. Just if you need to always label, go for it. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to plug in what I know, and reminder, slope is m, so I do know what m is. So I'm going to plug in y2, I'm just throwing in a y there, right? There's nothing there, minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and that's going to equal m, so I'm going to say it actually equals 4. So we have a nice little equation that we can now solve. So you just do a little simplifying. It comes out to y minus 5 over 1. I'm not even going to write over 1, right? Because any fraction over 1 is just whatever's in the numerator. So if you want to throw over 1 there, go for it, but you don't need to write it. If it was something else, you'd have to write it, but just anything over 1 is itself. That's going to equal 4. Oh, and then this is just a quick solve to get y by itself. So our main goal is, okay, we have all this information, just plug in what you know, and then your main goal is to solve for what you don't know. Now 11 is going to be a little bit of, not a different setup, same setup, it's just like things will be in different places. So let's take what we know and plug it into the slope formula. So I'm just going to kind of plug it in as I'm going. Y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 equals the slope. So the reason this one's a little funky is because x is in the denominator. And that can mess us up sometimes because we have a fraction and I can't get rid of it and it's a big hot mess. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to simplify that 11 minus 2. That gives me 7, right? I've been sending you pictures of my children outside. And then I'm saying, oh, shoot, what did I do? And it's a little funky because I need to get that fraction going, and that's weird. Here's what I always do for these problems because I'm always like, I don't know what to do with the denominator. I always just take this side and I make it a fraction. I can always put anything over 1, right? So the reason I do that is I know how to solve this now. This is a proportion. So I always find that the easiest way to kind of deal with that little issue of having an x in the denominator. I just make the right side into a fraction, and now I can cross multiply. Sorry, I'm like on my dining room table, and I have like a weird seam in my table. I'm having a tough time. Okay, so when I cross multiply this, that gives me 7. And then that gives me, I'm going to cross this way. It's negative 2 times 5 minus x. Just please make sure that the 5 minus x does have to go in parentheses because we are talking about multiplying by a binomial search times. We're going to do a little distributing. Just be careful because a negative times negative gives me a positive 2x. Then what will we do? Add 10 and then divide by 2. And that will give us our final, sorry. Oh, our final answer. So that's that one. Well, funky with the x in the denominator. We will be practicing those as we move forward. So just as a heads up. And then the last one. So I'm saying, what the heck am I doing here? Let's just set up what we have and then we'll figure it out. So throw in, sorry, I'm kind of running out of room here. Some space. Y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. I see a double negative. I'm just going to write it as a plus. But then I go to write the slope and I'm like, well, if I just write the word undefined, that's not actually helpful, right? So I have to think about what undefined means. Anytime we saw undefined here or up here, it just meant that the denominator was 0. It didn't really matter what the numerator was. So really in this case, I really just have to focus on the denominator and I need to make sure the denominator equals 0. That's the only way I can get an undefined slope. So you actually don't even really care about the numerator. It doesn't even matter what it is. So you can put it there if you want, but you don't need it. All I need to make sure is that when I have x plus 2, it equals 0. So if I subtract 2 from each side, that's your missing x. Because that would give me a denominator of 0. So a little funky. We'll practice these more as we move on, but there are those problems that just like you see a lot. So just as a heads up. And that's that. We're actually going to skip 13, 14. We don't need those for right now. And I'm skipping around. We actually don't need the top of this either. So I actually just want to look at a few graphs. I'm going to try 1 or 2 with you, and then I'm going to have you sketch 1 or 2. And then I will be checking your notes. And that will be it. So there's no other assignment today. There's no Google Classroom. You don't need to worry about, I don't know, logging back on and doing stuff. So once I've checked in with you at the end of class, then you're going to be done for the day, which is kind of nice. And that's that. So one thing I did want to go over with you is how to graph slope. So we talked about reading a graph, but now what do you do to actually graph it? So whenever we're graphing, you always need to start with a point. So I'm going to start for number 17. Once again, my numbers are totally off here. So you're skipping around. I don't even care about the numbers on your thing. But in general, you can just draw like a quick little thing in your axes on in your I can't talk to in your notebook. That's a good thing, or on your notes or wherever. So yours doesn't have to be perfect. Don't worry about it. But in general, you should be able to use Sketch. So whenever we're talking about graphing, you always need to start with a point. So in this case, I am going to start at the point 5, 2. So a point, you go X, then you go Y, and you see where they meet. So I'm going to count over from the origin, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to count up 1, 2. So once again, in your notebook, you're like, I don't have that nice graph. Just do this and count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. Anything like that is fine. Now the main thing that, or the thing that people mess up sometimes is now we say slope and they want to go back to the origin. Don't do that. No, no, no. The whole reason we put this point here is because we need to do our slope from that point. So that's why the point is always first. When we talked about the point, or when we talked about graphing slope before when we were just looking at the graphs, we talked about rise over run. So same thing goes here. I'm going to do rise over run. And since that is not a fraction, I'm going to make it a fraction. So I'm going to make this 3 over 1. And then that's how much I'm going to rise and run. So from this point, I'm having a tough time with my eyeballs today. I'm going to rise a 1, a 2, a 3, and I'm going to run 1. Technically, I only need 2 points for a line. I like to always kind of extend it a few. I always just think it looks nicer. So I can keep going up 1, 2, 3, 1. I can also go down 3 to the left 1, right? Because if I go down 1, 2, 3 to the left, that technically is a positive. But now that I have a few points, I would usually use a ruler, but I don't have one at my house. What a terrible math teacher I am. So I'm just gonna do my best to kind of, whatever works here. And that would be what my line looks like. Okay, so let's start. Well, actually, sorry, I'm trying to see what the other thing. We'll just kind of push these up together. That kind of quick. So the next one, all right. So I'm just gonna plot my point. I'm gonna go to the point 3. 1, 2, 3, negative 1. Remember, this is now where I'm doing my slope from. If it's 0, you can write 0 over 1. You can remind yourself, we had reminded ourselves in our notes previous to this, a horizontal line has a slope of 0. But once again, you can always kind of just go back to good old making them a fraction. Because if I rise a 0, that means I'm not going up or down. I'm just running. And when you run, you do it on the left. So now you have a nice horizontal line. So basically, anytime I see a slope of 0, I just remind myself it is horizontal through that point. Just as a heads up. Number 19, or if you're just not even numbering them because I've been skipping around, we have a point. The point is negative 2, 1. The slope is negative 2 over 1. I feel like that's kind of confusing, but just remember from here, this is your rise, this is your run. Your rise is negative. So from this point, you are going to go down 2 to the right 1. So please don't make the run negative. The run's still positive. You're going to move to the right. So you can keep doing that. You can keep going down 2 to the right 1. You can do it for a few. You could also go up 2 to the left 1. Because technically that's still a negative. And then once again, once you have a few points, you're just going to connect. All right, we only have 3 more. Not 9 more. Oh, that's going to be perfect. So you'll have a few minutes. So we go over to 210. Oh gosh, I can't count 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, it's just all the way at the top. Now here's the ish with this one. I'm giving. I mean, obviously you're just sketching yours, but I'm given this graph, and I don't want to go off the graph. That's ugly. Like I don't want to go. I'm trying to go up 4 over 1. Like I don't have room. I don't want you to be graph aligned. That's weird. So just as a reminder, you can always kind of not flip, but you can always rewrite things, right? So another way we can write 4 over 1 is we can write it as, instead of going up to the right, we can go down to the left. we can rewrite it as -4 over -1, right? Because that's still a positive. Two negatives are still a positive. So from here, instead of going up, right, my children just came in there yelling. I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left one. And once again, you can do that a few times. 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left. And then once you have a few points, you do have your line. And we can see it's still a positive line, right? If I look at it from left to right, it is going up, it's increasing. It's just we had to rewrite it in order to kind of keep it on there. So just as a heads up there. Like if I have -2/1, I can write that as 2 over -1. That means the same thing. It's just instead of going down to the right, you go up to the left. So you get the same line. So just as a reminder, keep that in the back of your head if you ever get like a funky little graph where things aren't fitting. All right, last two guys, and then we're done. So number 21, once again, if you don't have a number, that's fine. We go through the point -5, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, let's turn my eyes to do that. The slope is -2 over 3, so my rise is -2. I'm going to go down 2, and then I'm going to go to the right 1, 2, 3. But remember, I can also write this as 2 over -3, so I can go up 2 to the left 3, and it's still on the same line. Just a reminder, that was a terrible line, but you get the idea. Just a reminder how you can kind of rewrite points in time. Oh my god, that was pretty atrocious, but we'll go with it. And last but not least, we go through the point -2, -1. And then with undefined, I don't really know what rise and run are at this point, but I need to know, as you can see, you've seen it a few times. Anytime it's undefined, you just throw a vertical line through that point. And then you're done. All right. So I'm talking with cohort A. It seemed like most of you had kind of like done this last year type deal. But let's be honest, our brains took a little break for like 6 months there. So it's funny because I feel like this is the chapter people are like, oh, I know this. And then they do the worst at because they kind of know it, but they don't really know it or they don't remember all the details. So please, if you are a person that's like, I know this, I'm not doing it, I'm not participating, that's that's just not a good attitude to have. But two, we want to make sure we remember all the details. So that's that. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to X out of this. I'm going to turn my camera off. I will record my lessons. So as okay or not. Oh no, why is this not letting me like? Okay, I guess I'm recording myself. Okay, here we go. So I'm gonna